Good morning, Sunlight Kids and families. It is Thursday morning and it's the last day of April. And I'm having lots of feelings today. The last 2 days, we had some goodbyes outside of Hilltop. We had some families and kids come by and wave goodbye from their cars and get some of their things from the classroom. And it was really, really nice to see all of you who could come. We're really glad that you did. And we know that not everybody got to come, but those of you that didn't, we're going to see you again soon, this summer, I hope. And the reason I'm having lots of feelings is because even though it was so nice to see a lot of you yesterday, I also am feeling sad that it was a goodbye kind of day. And I know that some of you are going to come back to Hilltop sometime this summer, and I'm really excited about that and happy about that. And I also know that some of you, even though you're not coming back this summer, are going to be going to kindergarten in just a few months. And I'm really excited for you guys, because that's going to be a really fun adventure. You're going to love kindergarten. But I'm also sad that because some of you are not coming back to Hilltop this summer, I might not see you again for a really long time. And that does feel really sad. Do you ever have a day like that where you're having lots of different feelings about different things all at the same time? That's kind of what today feels like. Sad, but excited. And really looking forward to the slideshow tonight. I can't wait for our pajama party. I think that'll be really fun. So, because today is a kind of goodbye day, I have a goodbye chapter for you of Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta. And the reason it's a goodbye chapter is because I have to take a little break from telling this story. Because next week, Hilltop is going to reopen for some kids, and I'm going to be really busy at school helping those kids and those teachers that will be there. So I won't always get the morning time like I do now to record this. And all the Sunlight Kids and families are going to have different plans this summer. So because of that, today is kind of a last chapter of Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta, but just for now. I'd really like to say it's not the end, it's not the final end. I really hope Gretta, Retta, Henrietta can come back, but it's just the end for now. So today is chapter 25. And last chapter, do you remember what time of year it was? It was the spring, right? Like it is now. And do you remember what the big project was that the kids and the monsters worked on together? Remember, they planted a big garden in the backyard, right? And they planted lots of different seeds. And they took good care of it and made a plan that the monsters would keep it watered and it's going to get lots of sun. And the kids said that when they come back in the summer, they would be really excited to see how much things have grown. So now it's the summertime. And the kids knew that this was their day to go back to Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta's. So the days were getting very long and very warm, and the kids didn't need their coats anymore, and they didn't need their rain boots. They didn't need their warm clothes. They put on their shorts and their skirts and their short sleeve shirts, and they put on their good running shoes, their sandals, and they set out the door of their houses, and they all met up in the woods. And when they got there, the woods were very dry. There was no more mud or water on the ground. and the leaves were very bright and green in the trees. So it was the perfect day to run between the trees and get up on the trees and climb and play tag and hide and seek. And they did this for a long, long time until they finally got to the edge of the woods. And there in front of them was the big hill. And at the top of the hill was the haunted house. So the kids set to tromping up that big hill. And today it was pretty fast and pretty easy because there was no more mud. The ground wasn't wet anymore. It was pretty easy hiking. And they got all the way to the top. And there in front of them was the house, and they walked up to the door, and they knocked, knocked, knocked. And they heard some scurrying behind the door and some woo, and the doorknob turned. And there behind the door was Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta. And they had the biggest smiles on their faces. They were so excited to see their friends. Their friends came back like they always do. And they scooped the kids up in their big furry arms and gave them a big hug. They were all so happy to see each other. And the monsters said to the kids, "We're so glad you're here. What are we going to do today?" And the kids said, "Well, we've come back to see the thing that we did last time." And the monsters kind of puzzled about that for a minute. And they said, "Oh, the thing we did last time. Did we build a city last time you were here?" And the kids said, "No, we didn't build a city. Don't you remember?" And the monster said, Oh, right. We didn't build a city, did we?" And they kept thinking and they kept thinking. And Henrietta said, "Did we bake something?" And the kids said, "No, we didn't bake something. Don't you remember?" And Greta said, We didn't bake something. Did we make up a new game?" And the kids said, "No, we didn't make up a new game. Don't you remember?" And finally it was Retta who said, "Oh, I remember. You came back to see the garden." And the kids said, "Yeah, please show us. We want to see how much everything has grown." So the three monsters brought the kids back to the backyard. And sure enough, there was that big garden that they had built last spring. And the kids couldn't believe how many things had grown in the garden. Maybe you remember some of the seeds that they planted. There was the carrot seeds, right? And the carrots had gotten so big that their green tops were stretched so high above the garden bed. The green tops were almost as tall as some of the kids. Those carrots had gotten so big. And then on another side of the garden, they had long ropes, long strings tied up with little stakes, wooden stakes in the soil. Do you remember what was planted there? It was something that grows up in a vine. That was the snap peas, the green snap peas that are so delicious to snack on. And those had grown so big that they had completely twisted around and covered every single string from the bottom all the way to the top. And there were so many green snap peas, the kids couldn't even count them. And they looked delicious and ready for eating. And there were a few other seeds that they planted too. Do you remember what they were? There was some that the kids were super excited about. One was the pumpkin seeds, right? And the pumpkins had started to grow, but it was still very early in the season. Pumpkins don't get very big until it's the fall time, when it's time to harvest them. So these pumpkins were just starting to grow. They were really little, but their yellow flowers were growing on the vine. That was a good sign. That meant that they were doing really well and getting lots of nutrients from the soil and from the sun and getting just the right amount of water. So the kids were really excited there was going to be pumpkins in the fall. And the melons were growing too. Remember, they planted some melons, like watermelon, just some little round watermelons. And those weren't quite big yet either. I don't know a lot about melons, but I'm pretty sure you don't harvest them till later in the summer. So those were only about that big. But they were looking really good. They had the really green, spotty skins. That meant that they were getting lots of nutrients and they were growing really well. And there were some other things that they planted too. I'm trying to remember some of the seeds that they picked out. I think they planted some parsley, that those nice green leafy herbs that you can chop up and put in your food, but especially on your pasta, that tastes really good. They also planted strawberries. Patches of strawberries everywhere in the garden, and the strawberries were getting really red and plump and delicious. And there was also a section of potatoes, and those were growing on a vine under the soil. So the kids knew they were going to have to dig to find those. And they planted some garlic, and they could see the long white stalks coming out of the garden. And they also put flowers in the garden to attract bees and butterflies, because those are really good to have in your garden. So there were beautiful orange and red and yellow flowers all throughout the garden. And the kids were so excited because they knew they were going to get to pick some of these things that were ready to go. So they looked at each other and they looked at the monsters and they said, okay, how are we going to do this work of picking things? How are we going to decide who does what? And the monster said, yeah, how are we going to figure that out? Because there's so many things that need to be harvested. We might have to split up and work in little teams. And the kids really liked this idea. So Gretta said, okay, raise your hand if you want to pick the carrots. And a few kids raised their hand and said, oh, me, I love carrots. So those kids went over to the carrot section of the garden. And then Retta said, okay, raise your hand if you really like green snap peas. And a few kids said, oh, me, I love the snap peas. So those kids, they went over in a team over to the snap peas area. And then Henrietta said, okay, raise your hand if you really want to dig up the potatoes. And a few kids said, oh, me, I want to do the potatoes. So those kids all ran over to the potatoes section. And a kid said, but wait, we also need help picking some other things. And another kid said, yeah, what about the garlic? Who's going to help pick the garlic? So a couple kids from the potatoes said, oh, we'll come help pick the garlic. So they switched. They changed their idea. So they moved over to the garlic area. And another kid said, yeah, and who's going to help pick the strawberries? And a bunch of kids got super excited. And they raised their hand and jumped up and down and said, oh, strawberries, I changed my mind. I want to do strawberries. And there were so many kids that wanted to do strawberries that suddenly there was hardly anybody in the carrot section, hardly anybody in the green snap pea section, hardly anybody in the potato section, and nobody in the garlic section. So this was kind of a problem, because now they didn't have teams split up like they wanted to. And Henrietta said, sorry friends, I think this is too many people in the strawberry section. And Gretta said, yeah, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to just have a few kids pick the strawberries so everyone can split up and do the other areas. Well, this wasn't so easy, because all of those kids who had said they really wanted to do strawberries really wanted to pick strawberries. They really didn't want to change their plan anymore. So one of the kids in the group said, I'll stay in the strawberries while you guys go do something else. And the other friends said, hey, that's not fair. We don't want to switch. Why don't you switch to another section? And that kid said, well, because I got here first. And I don't have to move. And the other kid said, well, if you don't have to move, we don't have to move. And another kid said, yeah, that wouldn't be fair if some kids had to move and others didn't have to. And the first kid said, well, I'm not leaving because I got here first. And another kid said, yeah, well, I got here right after you, so I'm not leaving either. And then the next kid said, well, I got here after you, so I'm not going to leave either. And this went on and on and on and on until every single kid had said, well, I got here after you, so I'm not leaving either. And the kids were just sitting there, and nobody was willing to leave or change their plan. So they just sat like that for a while, and they kind of looked at each other and waited. And sometimes it looked like somebody was going to volunteer to move over to a different section of the garden. But then that kid would just say, "Nope, I'm not leaving. This is where I want to be." And then they'd just sit there and wait. And then another kid looked like maybe they were going to switch to another section, but then they would just say, "Nope, I'm not leaving either. This is my favorite part of the garden." And then they would just sit there and wait. And time kept passing by, and now nobody was harvesting anything out of the garden. Some kids were looking really frustrated and really mad that they weren't coming up with any kind of solution to this and just wasting the day. So Henrietta spoke up, and they said, "I'm worried that if we don't come up with a different plan, we're not going to pick anything from the garden today. We're just going to lose all our time together." And Retta said, "Yeah, I'm really worried about that too." And Gretta said, "Yeah, me too. It would be really sad if you guys came here and nothing got picked from the garden." And the kids listened to this, and they started nodding their heads, and some of the kids started saying, "Yeah, I want to pick stuff too. I don't want to just sit here all day. This isn't fun." And a lot of other kids agreed with that too. So one kid stood up, and that kid said, "Okay, I want to help us move forward and pick stuff from the garden. So I will be flexible, and I will go to the carrots instead." And the kid left the strawberry circle and walked over to the carrots. And the kids watched this happen, and another kid jumped up and said, "I want to be flexible too. I want us to pick stuff, so I will go over to the potatoes." So that kid left the strawberry circle and went to the potato area. And then another kid stood up and said, "Okay, I want us to move forward too. I'll go pick green snap peas. I do love snap peas." So that kid left. Another kid stood up and said, "I could help pick the garlic. That's really fun. I like digging them up." That kid went to the garlic. Another kid said, "Hey, nobody's volunteered for parsley. I can be in charge of the parsley area." So that kid went. And pretty soon it went on and on like this until there were just a few kids left in strawberries, and all the other kids had made teams back in the carrot area and the potatoes and the green snap peas and the garlic. And there were 2 people in charge of parsley because that was pretty easy to pick and there wasn't very much of it. So it didn't need a lot of kids. And they had figured it out. And Gretta, Retta, Henrietta looked around and they said, "Wow, you guys, you solved that problem. How did that happen?" And they were all trying to figure out, yeah, like how did we move forward? And one kid stood up and said, "I know what helped. Some of us were flexible." And another kid said, "Yeah, I noticed that too. That was the thing that helped us move forward." And a lot of kids were nodding their heads and agreeing. And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Oh, yeah, okay. Wait, what's flexible?" They had never heard that word before. And the kids, they kind of smiled and they said, "You don't know what flexible is?" And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "No, I don't know that word. It's a very strange word." And one of the kids said, "Oh, I can explain it to you." And that kid said, "It's when you really want to do one thing, but you decide that you're okay doing a different thing instead." And another kid said, yeah, it's like that. I have another way of explaining it. It's like when you really want this thing, but you decide that you're okay getting this thing instead." And another kid said, yeah, I have another way of saying it. It's like when you were really hoping for something, but it doesn't quite work out the way you were picturing it in your mind, and you decide to let the picture go and go with the flow of what's really happening. And Gretta, Retta, Henrietta thought about this, and they said, oh, yeah, interesting. That sounds really hard. Henrietta said, yeah, that would be really hard for me. Like, I remember this one time, Greta, Retta, and we really all wanted this big lollipop that was strawberry flavored and had all these swirls, but there was only one of them, and we all wanted it, and so we all just fought over it and broke it up into pieces and ate it as fast as we could before the other monster could get it, and then we were covered in strawberry sticky lollipop, which was kind of funny. But we were all really mad at each other after that because nobody really got what they wanted. And Greta Retta nodded their heads and said, oh yeah, I remember that time we fought over the lollipop. And the kids said, yeah, sometimes we get into arguments too because it is really hard to be flexible. Sometimes we really want something. And when it can't happen, or it doesn't happen the way we want it to, or our parents or our teachers or our friends are asking us to do something else, sometimes we really don't want to. And it's really hard, and we just want to say no. And sometimes we do just say no, because sometimes it's hard to change your mind and go with the flow. But most of the time, once you practice being flexible, it's really not that bad. And another kid said, yeah, it's really not a big deal. Especially if it's something like, do I pick the carrots or do I pick the potatoes? That doesn't really feel like a big deal to me. And another kid said, yeah, that would be different than like if our parents said, do you want to go to Disneyland or do you want to go to the grocery store? That would be really hard to pick the grocery store over Disneyland. And Greta, Retta, Henrietta, they were understanding that. They did have to ask what Disneyland was, though, because they had never heard of that before. And they realized, yeah, it makes sense. Like sometimes it's easier to be flexible about small things than it is about things that feel really big or important. So they had all split up and they had figured out where they were willing to work in the garden. So now that they were there, they were ready to get started. Some of the kids decided to just use their bare hands and get into the dirt and pull those carrots and those potatoes out. Use their fingers to start delicately picking the snap peas from the vines or to pull the strawberries from the patch. And some kids really didn't like their hands getting very dirty. They didn't really like getting dirt under their fingernails. So they asked Greta, Retta, Henrietta to make some shovels appear. So they snapped their furry fingers and poof, 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 poof. Every kid that wanted one got a little shovel or a spade, you can call it. Some kids got little gardening gloves to keep their hands from getting dirty. And everybody got what they needed, and they all were feeling good about doing the work. So they kept working, digging, pulling, plucking. They worked and they worked and they worked and they worked until everything that was ready to be harvested from the garden had been harvested. The strawberries were all picked and they were placed in a lovely glass bowl that Greta, Retta, Henrietta could snap their fingers and make appear. All of the carrots had been pulled from the soil and they were sitting in a big basket with their long green tops overflowing. All of the potatoes had been dug up from out underneath the soil, and they were all in a big basket, all kind of dusty and dirty. And all those delicious bright green snap peas, those had been plucked very carefully from each vine And they were all in a big glass bowl too, and they looked so ready for eating. And the garlic had been pulled, and the parsley had been snapped out, and everything that was ready for harvesting was out of the garden. And now every little group of kids and monsters, they had all this food. And Gretta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Okay, let's eat." And they started to dig their furry paws into one of the bowls. Henrietta went and dug their hand into the strawberries and started stuffing it in their mouth. And Retta went over to the carrots and just grabbed a bunch of them and just started chewing on the carrots. And Gretta went over to the snap peas and just took a big pile of snap peas in their monster hand and started eating the snap peas. And the kid said, no, wait. Put the brakes on, you guys. So Gretta and Henrietta, they stopped mid-chew. And they said, "Woo!" And the kids said, "We can't just dig in now. Let's make a plan for how we're going to eat all this stuff." And Gretta, Retta, Henrietta, they felt a little bad, and they said, "Ooh." And they quickly chewed their food and swallowed it. And they said, "Okay, let's make a plan. We're sorry, we're just really hungry, and this food looks really good." So they all talked, and the whole group of kids and monsters decided that they were going to cook something with all this food that they had harvested from the garden. And so they went into the kitchen, and everybody got really busy making food. Some kids started chopping the carrots to make a salad. And some other kids, they rinsed the green snap peas, and they got a big frying pan on the stove and filled it with oil and turned on the heat and waited till the oil was nice and hot, and they threw the snap peas in, and it popped and fizzled and crackled as the snap peas started to get cooked in the oil. And some other kids chopped up the garlic, and they added that to the snap peas that was cooking on the stove, and oh, they could smell that garlic. It smelled so good. I can smell it right now if I imagine hot garlic frying on the stove. Can you smell it? Oh, it smells so good. And they threw in some salt and pepper. And some other kids got busy slicing up the strawberries because they were going to make that in a bowl with a little bit of sugar sprinkled on top into kind of like a fruit salad. And some other kids, they were chopping up the potatoes, and they mixed the potatoes with some mayo and some celery, and they had Greta, Retta, Henrietta snap their fingers to make some hard-boiled eggs appeared, and they mixed all that together, and they made a potato salad. And then they chopped up the parsley at the end, and they sprinkled the parsley over all the things, over the carrot salad and over the snap peas and over the potato salad. They even put a little bit on the strawberries because they wanted to see what that would taste like. That was pretty good. So they had all these dishes ready to go, and now it was time to dig in and eat. And the kids said, "Let's do it." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Oh, we've been waiting so long. We're so hungry." So they started digging their hands in again, and the kids said, "No, wait. We need plates and bowls." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "We do?" And the kids said, "Yeah. I mean, that's how we eat. We know you guys probably eat differently because you're monsters." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Oh, okay." So they snapped their fingers, and there appeared all these plates and bowls and spoons and forks. And the kids started to serve themselves, and the monsters watched the kids, and the monsters said, "Is it okay if we just eat with our hands?" And the kids said, "Yeah, that's okay. We know that's how you're used to eating. You eat the way you like to eat, and we'll eat the way we like to eat." And they all agreed this was a good idea. So the monsters got their big handfuls, one at a time, and snacked on things from each bowl, while the kids served a little bit of everything on their plates. And they enjoyed all the delicious things they had just prepared from the garden. And it was such a great feast. And they ate and they ate and they ate until the moon was very high in the sky. And it was time for the kids to go home. But this time, it felt really different. And the kids had something important that they had to tell Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta. And so the kids said, "It's that time when we need to go home." And Gretta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll see you next time you come in the fall." And the kids said, "We won't be back in the fall." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "But why?" And the kids said, "Well, life has just changed, and our families want us to stay closer to home. And they want us to take a break from all our adventures, just for a little while." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta, they got really sad. And they said, "Does this mean that we're not going to see you anymore?" And the kids said, "For a little while, yeah, but not forever. We are going to come back, but it's just not going to be as soon as we usually come back." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "Okay, but it's not forever, right?" And the kids said, "Yeah, it's not forever. We promise we'll be here again, but it'll just be a little bit longer this time. And then as soon as we can go on an adventure again, we'll be back." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta, they nodded their heads and some tears went down their cheeks, and the kids started to cry too, because even though they knew it wasn't forever, goodbyes are really sad. And so they all cried together, and they all gave each other big hugs. And they said, "We'll see you again one day soon." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta wiped the tears from their eyes. And they said, "Yeah, we'll see you again soon. Don't forget about us." And the kids said, "Oh, we could never forget about you. Even if 100 years went by, we would never, ever forget about you guys." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta really liked that. That made them feel really good. And the kids said, "You know what? Here's something you can remember. Even though we're not going to come and see you face to face, you can always talk to us or know that we're there and here." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta said, "What does that mean? What's in here?" And the kids said, "Well, that's something that our grown-ups say to us whenever we don't get to see them, like when we're going to school or we're going away to our grandparents for the weekend or a friend's house. Our grown-ups always tell us, if ever you're missing me and you want to talk to me, all you have to do is remember that I'm right in there in your heart, wherever you go for your whole life. The people you love most are always right here." And Greta, Retta, Henrietta thought about that, and they really liked that. That felt really good. It felt really safe to them. And they said, "Okay, so when we're really missing you and we just want to think about you and talk to you, we'll just remember that you're right here, and we'll picture you in our minds, and we'll have a little chat in our minds and our hearts." And the kids said, "Yeah, we really want you to do that, because we're going to do that too every time we're thinking about missing you too." And the monsters said, "Okay, so we have a plan about what we're going to do until we see each other in person again." And so they all gave each other a big hug again. And Greta, Retta, Henrietta snapped their furry fingers. And poof, 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 poof. All the kids disappeared and reappeared back near their homes or in their homes, One kid appeared in their driveway and had to scurry into the house super quick. Another kid appeared halfway through their dog door, and they had to wiggle out of the dog door to get all the way in the house. Another kid appeared in the attic, which was a little bit creepy, and they quickly ran down the stairs to get out of the attic. One kid ended up in the bathtub with the warm water and the soapy bubbles. That poor kid who always ends up in the chimney got a little bit of a burn on their butt, but they jumped out real quick and they were okay. And as always, there's that other kid who always reappears back in the toilet. They had to hop out real quick and take off their wet clothes and put on their pajamas until every kid was back safely at home and in their bed, where they dreamed about Gretta, Retta, and Henrietta. And that, my friends, is the end for now. Thank you for listening. This has been so much fun being able to come up with these stories and know that you're right there on the other side listening. And I really hope that you've enjoyed them. And I want you to know that even if I'm not going to see you for a while, that you're always going to be right here and here. And I'm going to be thinking about you and feeling you here and sending you a lot of love. And I hope that you can feel me here and think of me up here too when you can't see me. And that's true of all of us Sunlight teachers. We love you and we'll always be thinking of you. So here's a big kiss, mwah, and a big hug for you and your whole family. And I really look forward to seeing you again one day soon. Goodbye, Sunlight.